Evening, and welcome to a very special episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 3, Episode 18, Distant Voices. But before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely, and as I say every week, you should find us and follow us because we are awesome. And not only will we be talking about distant voices tonight, we will also be paying tribute to Star Trek Deep Space Nine overall, celebrating its 30th anniversary this week. January 4th, 1993 was when the very first episode of this show was released. And here we are, 30 years later, still talking about what is, in my opinion, the greatest Star Trek show out there. Okay.
Yeah,
Now, I know there's going to be people who go, original series, Next Generation, Voyager, so forth and so on, and that's fine. You can have your favorites, but Deep Space Nine is still the best. So just deal with it. And anyway, if you're here, if you're listening to us, you have to agree that the show must be at least great.
yeah,
Yeah. So be able to just go ahead and enjoy what we're going to talk about tonight. Again, the episode Distant Voices, and just kind of looking back at Deep Space Nine as a whole. Trying my best not to give any spoilers because David has not seen this show before,
right,
so I don't want to give away the greatness. I want him to come to it naturally. So
right,
I will try my best to restrain myself while we talk about this phenomenal show tonight.
right. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Great. So, one thing I did before we started tonight was I went back and actually listened to our very first broadcast
Oh, man.
uh, for the Fire Case, where we talked about the very first episode, Emissary, and there were a couple of things that I thought would be very interesting for us to kind of go back over again as we talk about the
Yeah,
anniversary of the episode. One being your interpretation of the Picard Cisco relationship during and of course how we see that play out during the infamous meeting scene, and
right,
then also the impact of the pilot overall and why it was such a successful pilot compared to some other shows that we've talked about on this show and other Star Trek shows as well. And I think, having listened to us and watched the episode again, I think I've pinpointed it's such a great why it's such a successful um, pilot. Okay.
gotcha. Okay,
All right.
gotcha.
So, with that being said, let's kind of dive right into it. We'll get to the episode Distant Voices, but let's do some of the anniversary stuff first. So,
Okay, yeah.
to take you back to remind you a little bit, when you first started watching Deep Space Nine, you had actually not completed your first run of Next
TNG.
Generation,
That's right.
right? So you were very much in that camp, though, that Next Generation was a great show.
hmm
You enjoyed the characters there, and in particular Captain Picard.
hmm
And then we see this meeting between Cisco and Picard. Do you remember what your thoughts were in regards to those two individuals encountering each other?
If I were just to say what I think now is just that Picard comes off as his very respectable self, very friendly, but Cisco is a character really introduces himself as a very different individual. He's got that. He's angry at Picard. He blames Picard for the events at Wolf Nine. Am I remembering the name
Wolf
correctly?
359.
Three
Wolf
five nine. There we go.
359.
Um, Picard had been captured by the Borg and had turned into their kind of front man for their invasion of Earth and the Federation, and that meant that the Cisco had been attacked as a part of a crew on a ship, and his wife had died, and all that. And so the scene where he shows up and Picard is friendly and outgoing, and the Picard that we know and love, and Cisco is not just he is barely on the edge of just smacking Picard in the face, like straight up just knocking
Barely
him out right then
contained
and there.
rage.
Right. And so Picard goes from outgoing and friendly to strictly professional. Like he
Hmm.
knows there's something going on. He doesn't even fully understand what, but he's like, all right, Cisco, are you good to do this job or not? Because like you're being called to do this. I don't know what your problem is, but are you good to go? and Cisco is like, I'll do it. I don't want to do it. This isn't the thing I really wanted to do, but damn right I'm going to do it. Like it's like he's throwing it back in Cisco's face that yeah I'm going to do it as like a challenge to Picard, and it's a great scene. It really shows the difference in the two characters, so it really makes sure you know these are not the same character. They have different motivations, different backgrounds, um, different leadership styles. Even
Mhm.
Cisco is going to be much more passionate when it comes to his emotions. Picard can be passionate, don't get me wrong, but Cisco really kind of breathes his emotions a bit more. Um, so yeah, it's a great scene. There's more to talk about, of course, but
Yeah.
that
No,
scene alone was fantastic. If we could have just gotten, I wish we could have more of those two characters together. And I
so
imagine that's it. That's the only scene we
So I'm
got.
going to say that you're almost spot on for what you said all that time ago when we
Yeah,
recorded that. You're absolutely correct. We said that we one like you just said we wish there had been more of an interaction, more scenes between Picard and Cisco. Cisco was definitely barely contained rage. Picard seems to shrink away from Cisco at first when he realizes who he is and who he is to Cisco,
right.
and their first meeting when he was Locutus of
Hmm.
Borg, and then how
Hmm.
he switches into, you know, duty and honor. And this is, you're while you wear the uniform, you have a job to do. That is kind of how Picard recovers in that scene a bit. In fact, we talked at length about how when Picard first realizes that Cisco knows him from Wolf 359, how Picard shrinks away from Cisco for a little bit,
Yeah,
and then he recovers when it comes to that whole, this is your job. You're a Starfleet officer. As long as you wear that uniform, we expect you to carry out your duty. And that's
right,
when Picard kind of comes back and is the man that we had come to know.
right,
Um, we also talked about how Cisco is kind of the Batman to Picard's Superman.
right,
Picard is a very polished, professional, um, career officer who, he's kind of been through a lot, but he always comes off as that apex top tier captain. And then we have this other individual who is, damaged, broken, severely PTSD'd here from
hmm,
everything that's happened to him up to this point,
right,
and how he is still doing the job, but he does the job from a much darker place.
hmm,
So kind of the same scenario again. That's why we gave that comparison of Superman and Batman.
right,
And what we see throughout the rest of that episode is is Cisco doing something that Batman never really did, which is deal with his grief and
right,
learn to move past it. Um, it is a two-parter episode. We do see this kind of happen over seemingly what would be a shorter arc, and as we talked about then, and as we've said now, it would have been cool to see this play out um, under a much longer stretch,
right,
right? Instead of it being resolved in the pilot, as it essentially is, to
hmm,
see this kind of drawn out a bit more throughout the rest of the season and maybe into season 2 or 3,
right,
would have been nice
yeah,
to kind of fully flesh out the character and to make it a bit more realistic. But
yeah,
this was the '90s, and that was not how any of this is going to work. We're all about wrapping things up in storylines as much as possible, you
right,
know. But yes, it would have definitely made for greater, um, I guess, story building to see Picard and Cisco have a few more run-ins where they have to kind of confront these feelings and deal with them, and then eventually learn to move past them, rather than the quick wrap up that we do get when
right,
when when Picard and Cisco shake hands at the end of the episode and the Enterprise departs.
right,
Still, though, a great scene. When I went back and I watched it again, and I picked up on a couple of different things this time around. Like, we know how the prophets like to use people who are, I guess, within the scenes as their voices, as their representation. So we saw the prophets who were speaking as Jennifer and as Jake and as Kaiopaka and so forth. And
right,
there was one alien character in there who was I guess, the Bolian lieutenant from the Saratoga that was on Cisco's ship. And I do believe he pops up a couple of different times, but not just as the Bolian, but as the human behind it, like the actor who played the character. They just used him again and just took the makeup off of him. He pops up a couple of other times because I kept noticing. I was like, why does that guy keep? He looks so familiar, and I think about it. I was like, I think that's because he was supposed to
That
be the
actor.
alien
Hmm.
every time. So yeah, it was the actor. Um, watching I say all that just to kind of get to those scenes in anyway, but watching him have to explain the concept of a linear existence to aliens who exist outside of that, I thought was also a very interesting take. Do you remember any of that at all?
Yeah, I remember that. That's part of what he's having to do. That's part of what makes the prophets characters that come off as godlike beings, as they exist out of time, and then him having to explain that makes him the emissary to the Dorans. He's the first one to really visit the wormhole and visit the Sky Temple effectively. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and of course, there's that wonderful scene where he gets to relive, meeting his wife and for the first time on the beach, and his great kind of one-liners with her. Um, Real quickly, is that scene supposed to be like? At what point is he reliving what he did versus coming up with new stuff? Like, part of me wonders if he was like coming out with these great lines, like. I bet you use that line on all the girls. He says, "Never before and never again." Like, is that because he
Oh,
said that at the
that
time, or
so
because he is in the moment reliving it and knowing that he'll never use the line?
so I always took that as when he has the orb experience with Kaiopaka and he is back reliving that moment on the beach and talking with Jennifer and that I took that as it's both a flashback and him reliving the moment, right? So part of it is yes, these are the things that he recalls saying and her responses
Right.
to what he was saying, but then there was also he had the knowledge of the fact that he knew where things were going
So it is
with
both.
them.
It is
Yeah,
him
so it's a
reliving
it's
it.
a bit of both in that particular scene,
Right.
not in later scenes when he's explaining to the prophets how a linear existence is a lot like baseball and
Yeah.
how we try to prepare for scenarios through practice, but we can't totally prepare for every single thing. We must adapt as the
Mhm.
situation goes on, and sometimes we
Right.
make mistakes, sometimes we get it right, whatever. But no, that one was yes, he was just reliving that scene, and I always thought that was probably the coolest, most smooth pickup line scene you could ever have.
Yeah.
You know, and for those of you who may not remember, she tells him, she's telling him that her mother had warned her about Starfleet officers, junior Starfleet officers, and he says, "Your mother is going to love me." And she says, "I bet you say that to all the women that you meet." And he was like, "Never before and never
Never
again."
again. Yeah.
And yeah, and then another line he uses is he says, "It's not every day that you meet the woman that you're going to marry."
Right.
And I mean, it was just like everything he did, just like building on itself. And I mean, he totally had her, wrapped around his finger basically, and it was just like,
Right.
man, Cisco just
Right.
kind of laid it down real smooth for her and didn't give her a chance to not be impressed by him. So
Right.
yeah, great opening scene and interaction between young Ben and Jennifer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was those are a lot. There were a lot of great scenes in that first episode because it was a two-parter, so it's two episodes. But um, yeah, the Cisco scene really stands out. I'm sorry, the Picard scene really stands out because again, it's the scene that sets up the dynamic that this is a different character. Um, and going back to the whole Batman versus Superman thing, as we've come forward, he Cisco isn't Batman in the he's the tech savvy millionaire playboy type. That's not him at all. That's not the comparison. It's the emotional rawness of him as a
Yes,
character. Um,
the damaged
right.
man doing the job.
And doing it well, doing a hard job, but doing it well. His traumatic experiences have taught him how to be empathic.
Empathetic,
Uh,
either one works here.
yeah,
Yeah.
with other people. Like I'm thinking of the episodes, the with the Oh gosh, the people who are rebelling in the neutral zone.
The Maquis.
I knew it was an M, Maquis. Yeah, like he wants them to stop doing this crazy rebellious stuff, but he also sympathizes with them, and he goes to them and he tries to like make peace. Like you gotta stop. You really get that from him, and not that Picard wouldn't do that, but yeah, Cisco just comes off as more raw. And that really
Yes.
makes Batman a great character. Superman is the guy flying above the clouds, kind of above it all. He deigns to like visit you and make things better. Like I've always laughed at the idea that
Almost
if
almost godlike, comical, the way he lords
exactly,
over the rest of us and then imposes his will because he is so
yeah, he's
immeasurably
overly powerful.
strong.
Yeah,
Right. There's nothing that, there's no way you can argue with him. Whereas Batman is definitely your down to earth in the trenches, can understand the situation, but also he imposes his own, justice, but it comes more from a point of tragic understanding
right.
than again him lording something over you.
Yeah, so like the best example of that too is the whole good cop bad cop he has with Odo. Like Picard couldn't do bad cop or even good cop in those scenarios. He is the man of the law. He is to be respected, and he's gonna do what he needs to do to get things done. He's gonna be straight up, straightforward. But Cisco, he can get down and dirty if he needs to, ring a
Blackmail
few.
blackmail someone,
Yeah,
blackmail a certain bartender to get him to stay around for a
yeah,
while.
if he has to twist a few arms, he's not gonna. He might be up, sad that he had to do it, but it's not gonna stop him. Um, yeah, it makes Cisco a character that can have more depth than excuse me than Picard sometimes, and which is why I'll say it again. I'm sad that Cisco doesn't seem to get the central focus that Picard seems to get on the Enterprise. Even this episode, Distant Voices, Cisco is barely in it.
He is. He's barely in it. That is a
he
great point.
doesn't
That
he
yeah,
doesn't even have like a full 60-second scene. I'm sure he's not even in it for 60 full seconds. He's only in it for
yeah.
the briefest moment, and then gone. Um, yeah,
I
yeah, I guess
I
yeah.
have no what, thinking about the episode, I have no idea why they did that. It was like even in the brief moment that he's in, and we're gonna get to the episode later, I promise. But even in that brief moment that he's in it, to me, he was already more compelling than the other people that we saw. Because everybody
Mhm.
else was like arguing and being very irrational and whatever else.
Yeah,
Cisco
you're right.
Cisco was once again doing a job. He was
Yes,
working.
he was
Everybody else is
the yeah.
bickering and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
he's being Bashir as Bashir would want to be. He's being the perfect doctor in a situation. Yeah.
yeah.
Um yeah, I really like Cisco as a character, and I feel like those moments where he's allowed to really shine, he's fantastic, but they are much fewer and far between than we would give Picard. Picard is always center stage, even in
Yes.
episodes that aren't his focus. He is still there. There's never an episode that I can really think of where he's only in there for 60 seconds at most. That would
Yes,
not happen to
anytime
Picard.
yes, even when Picard is not the central focus of the episode, when he does show up, he does command a larger presence, larger scene for the part that he is there, and then
Right.
that goes back to the other person.
And
And
his
typically, whenever they
decisions
have
yeah, his
yes.
decisions affect the episode in some capacity. He is still able to
Mhm.
affect an episode with his decisions. Yeah.
So this is why Deep Space Nine was such a departure from what we had seen in Star Trek before. In the original series, the show was driven very much by Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and their interactions with either each other or with other aliens. It was very rare that we saw things that focused on other crew members. And typically, even when there were other crew members, those three, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, typically had to solve the issue for the
Right.
other crew member. Then, of
Right.
course, with Next Generation, here was an attempt at an ensemble cast. They were going to focus more on the other characters to drive the plot. But again, it does typically come back to Picard
Right.
and Picard's decision and how that decision affects the people that are around him that he commands.
Right.
It later becomes kind of a Picard and Data show to a bit, because we're watching Data explore humanity. He was such a unique character for
Right.
that show that even other unique characters were a bit overshadowed by Data's uniqueness, I
Right.
guess. And even then, they still try to capitalize on it by not only having data but also having lore. So it did very much become a Picard data show there for a bit, but it
Right.
was. I feel like it was done well. We still got a lot of development with the other characters. Probably the only one who didn't get as much development as maybe they deserved was Dr. Crusher. I always felt like she didn't get as much as some of the other characters, and a lot of her storylines were often tied to Wesley or Picard.
Right.
So her standalone stuff just there wasn't a whole lot of, which hopefully they they finally reconcile in the third season of Star Trek Picard, which airs in February of this year. So we'll get to see some more of her. Get to see more of the entire original cast in that. But yeah,
Right.
but then here we come with Deep Space Nine, another ensemble cast show. Here they are trying to tell a story about everybody and how they all kind of interweave together. And now it seems like in order to do that, we've departed entirely from ha- giving our commanding officer the same kind of presence that we had with Picard and his
Right.
crew. So, and it is I guess it would be jarring, especially when you come from the next generation, you have that kind of expectation to come to this show and you get very little of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that could definitely be jarring on this. But
Right.
again, that's something that sets this show apart. And I think that in the long run, it does a better service on the show because by the time Deep Space Nine is over, I feel like you know everybody
Right.
very well, not
Hmm.
just one character here and there or anything like that, but you feel like you know everybody. You understand all of their motivations very well. Now, granted, we're just now in the third season, coming up on the end of the third season of
Hmm.
our run through here. So we've got
Yeah.
a lot to go. But I think that when we do our recap at the very, very end, I think you'll agree with me that yeah, we know all of the characters. We feel very much in tune with all of them.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
So we will put some of this recapping of Deep Space Nine aside for now, and we will now turn to the episode Distant Voices. And this was the 19th episode of
18th,
season
I
three.
believe. Yep.
18th.
18. Hmm.
And this
Yeah.
one featured another character that we've often felt we just didn't see a lot of, at least in these first seasons, and that would be Dr. Bashir. And would you like to give the recap, or do you want me to do it?
Oh, I guess I can do it this time. So
All right.
yeah, in this one, we start off with Dr. Bashir and Garrick eating, not in Quarks, but Dr. Bashir tells Garrick that he's about to turn 30 and how that in human cultures is kind of a milestone. You're not a child anymore. You can't ignore aging anymore. You really have to start thinking about it more often. Garrett gives them a hard time. It's like, oh, in my culture, we think aging makes you mature and powerful, and uh, just the two of them give me a hard time. Garrick gives actor Dr. Bashir a gift. I guess it's a murder mystery in the Hollow
Uh,
Suite, but
mhm.
Dr. Bashir just complains that in mysteries from the Cardassians, it's not who done it, it's why is everyone guilty? what are the motivations behind everyone's guilt? How do we prove their guilt? Which is, there's not. It's not like a list of people. We find one person. It's everyone's guilty and why. Which I just love that. It's a fun, hilarious moment. But anyway, Cork comes up with a Lethian named Altovar, and he's very shy about coming up to Bashir, very kind of hesitant. He's like, "Hey, this guy here, he wants to buy some biomimetic gel. Anything you know about that?" And Bashir's like, "That stuff is strictly restricted. It's not something that's publicly available. You have
Mhm.
to get permission to get it. Why do you want it?" And Altovar huffs off. Basically, he doesn't want to say. He's just an ugly looking alien who looks pretty menacing.
Yeah,
And
Lethians are
so
not attractive at all.
yeah. But later, when Bashir goes to his infirmary, he finds Altovar has broken in and is stealing the gel from his supplies. And when he finds Bashir coming in, he attacks him with some sort of hand field thing on his brain and knocks him unconscious. And when he wakes up, he finds things on the station are very strange. First off, he's starting to age. His first signs are he's getting gray hair. The station is completely abandoned and dark, and there's a monster in Quarks. He goes to Quark, and Quarks, and Quark is hiding. He's afraid. He won't say what's going on, um, and runs away. Bashir starts hearing voices, and he can't figure out what's going on. He finally is able to find O'Brien, Dax, Odo, and Kira. And by this
Hmm.
point, he's really starting to noticeably age. No one else has aged, but they're all behaving strangely. And he starts to realize that the voices he's hearing are actually of the crew in the real world,
Yeah.
trying to figure out why he's unconscious, and they're trying to figure out a way to bring him back from being unconscious from when he was attacked by Altovar, the Lethian. Um, he determines that all four of the main characters are actually representatives of his personality. Like Odo is his fear and doubt. Kira is his aggressiveness. O'Brien is his doubt. I think I might have mixed started that. Anyway, and then Dax is his aggressiveness. Or not aggressiveness, but like go get him attitude. That's not quite right, but you get the point.
Yeah.
He eventually finds Cisco, as we've mentioned. Cisco is acting as like the perfect version of Bashir. He's helping people as a doctor. He's very in tune with his abilities. Even Bashir and Cisco give the same out loud diagnosis and prescription for what to do at the same moment. However, at that very the reason Bashir is looking for Cisco is because he's trying to get to Ops. He thinks that, well, if I'm unconscious, this whole area is just a dreamscape. This is me trying to make sense of my being unconscious. I need to go to Ops and to fix if I fix the station from whatever is attacking it and damaging it, then that'll fix my real brain and I'll be able to wake back up. And the reason he comes to that conclusion is because O'Brien was able to fix some of the stuff that was able to make him hear the voices from outside more clearly. There's a problem, though. It turns out the monster that's been on the station is a version of Altovar, I guess the
Hmm.
nightmare version of him. And he's able to move through walls. Like he captures Cisco and drags him behind a wall. He attacks and kills the other members. Um, and meanwhile, Garrick has been showing up. At one point, he's suddenly playing tennis with Garrick, and so Garrick is the last one standing. And so he goes with Garrick. And then by this point, Bashir is an old man. He's completely unable to move himself. His hip is broken. And he has Garrick take him up to Ops. And up in Ops is a surprise birthday party for Bashir. And
And some random woman singing happy birthday.
yeah, a gorgeous Dabo girl. Yeah, exactly. And when he tries to open up the panels, it's tennis balls, and he can't fix anything. And he realizes that all the other characters were like a manifestation of some part of him, but Garrick doesn't seem to match that. So he challenges Garrick, and Garrick morphs into Altovar, and Altovar makes fun of him and says, "You're dying, and you're never going to recover." Bashir realizes that he actually needs to go back down to the medical bay, and it's in there where he is actually most powerful that he's able to defeat Altovar, which allows him to
Mhm.
wake back up. And um, yeah, that's basically
That's
it.
essentially it. That's the episode. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes, he goes instead of always fighting to go to ops, he has to go back to where he is in command, where he's in control,
right,
which is sick bay, and
right,
that's how he's able to gain the upper hand um on Garrick, who is actually the Lethian.
right.
So
And again, to be very clear, the Lethian in his dreams is not the actual real Lethian. Everyone in his dreams are fake. It's not that the
yeah, they're
Lethian
all
somehow infiltrated his brain. It's just his, nightmare version of everyone, including the
right.
Lethian Altavar. So, yeah,
So again, interesting episode, I would say. again, we get a bit more of the character development in regards to Bashir, and recognize that he is a person who doesn't want to be reminded of his age and
Yep.
growing old.
Yep.
Um, which he talks about again. He's turning 30, and
Right.
how that marks kind of the downward decline into decrepancy. You
Hey,
know,
shut up, Bashir. For us who are already past that age.
right, right. It's just one of those things like remember watching it well before I was 30 than when I was 30 and now that I'm older than 30 and being
Yeah.
like all three, just the first one being like, no big deal. I'm not going to be 30 like ever. And then finally hitting 30 and being like, oh, it's not that bad. And now here I am, 36, soon to be 37. I'm like, man, you know what? He was really right.
Yeah.
Um,
Man, I'll doubt it.
um, But so I want to actually talk about that for a second. This whole how we view aging, which is something that Garrick and Bashir talk about when they're sitting there at the table. In Cardassian society, they view advanced age as a sign of respect and power, whereas contrasting how we view this in human society as it's a steady march to decline
Right.
and not being able to do anything. And as we see that play out throughout the episode, Bashir is getting weaker and weaker. And despite his sharp mind, he is unable to do certain things because his limitations of his body.
Right.
So, do you feel this was an accurate representation of how we as humans view age, or I guess as a society, or even as for yourself? Do you feel this way, or was this kind of an over exaggeration?
Well, I would say that certainly in modern American culture, there is definitely an emphasis placed on youth. I think an overemphasis on youth, an overemphasis on the idea that youth is innocent and pure. Like you're kind of corrupted by society is our modern interpretation of how things are. Like you come out of the womb and you know who you are, and then society gets a hold of you and corrupts you into some backward version of who you should be, and then you have to like free yourself from society and free yourself from the shackles of your you know parents and history and from everyone else telling you what to do with yourself. I think that is certainly true of today, but throughout most of human history I would say that the idea that your elders, some cultures they worship their ancestors. It's the elders lead the group. It really is important, your age and your leadership position. But I certainly would say that modern American culture has de-emphasized how important it is to be older per se, and aged and learned and have wisdom, and is more emphasizes more um, you know aggressiveness, is the youthfulness, aggressiveness, ambition. um, and so when Bashir fits that to a T. That's who he is. He is a guy who is ambitious, and part of what the episode was kind of about, the whole reason the tennis balls were coming up, is because the Lethian was saying that Bashir originally was supposed to be some great tennis player, but he like intentionally failed in tennis, and he intentionally failed to become valedictorian as a doctor. Like he intentionally screwed up that one text question about the post ganglionic nerve and all that. Um, and so the question for Bashir is like, has he felt that his ambition was something to be afraid of and therefore intentionally sabotaged himself? And Bashir ultimately says that no, even if I had been, like, if I was a good tennis player, I'm a great doctor, and that's who I am. And if I was valedictorian, I would have still chosen this posting. Um,
Hmm.
I still am meeting all of the ambition and potential that I could have been as a person. Um, so yeah, I would say that the episode, I would say that you could find cultures that would emphasize the importance of older people, but certainly modern American culture, even 30 years ago, was more interested in youthfulness, and
Hmm.
so yeah, Bashir fits that to a T.
Yeah, I would agree. And even in the earlier scenes that we had seen with Bashir in earlier episodes, um, the focus on his youth was very apparent. When we
Mm,
first meet him, in fact, he's 27 years old. This is his first major assignment straight out of the academy. He's talking already about how eager he is because he wanted frontier medicine. He's very
yeah,
naive. They do paint him as very, very green, very inexperienced.
right.
And
Offensively
then,
so.
yes, yes, multiple times he offends people by talking about how young and naive he is about
Right,
certain things. He's
right,
very arrogant, that arrogance that only comes through youth.
right,
And then we see, there's a point where he's nominated for an award and is trying to downplay that scenario because he didn't think that he was old enough for it, even though he secretly wanted it, as we discovered through the episode. He'd even prepared an acceptance speech
right,
for it in case he won it. And then this is not the first time that we had heard him talking about how close he had come to being valedictorian, how he had made a mistake, and then we find out through the Lethian here that the mistake he made was a very obvious blunder, that a first year student would have picked up on this. And so was it truly a mistake, or was this Bashir sabotaging himself?
right,
And it makes you wonder about other decisions that he made. Like, we hear how great he was as a tennis player, and yet he chose to move away from that, and he's this top-notch doctor, which he is. And I mean, he backs himself up in saying how he's a even better doctor and he loves medicine, and he still would have chose the assignment. But it does make you wonder about a man who would seem to have an endless supply of skill and
right,
potential to
mhm,
intentionally do things that seem to sabotage himself.
right,
So we do get that a bit, and we don't necessarily get an answer here other than Bashir saying, "Hey, I'm fine with how my life is. This is what I wanted."
right,
So I guess that is an answer in and of itself. Um, but yeah, I think that we've also done a great job. Well, I say we haven't done a great job, but I think society as a whole has changed a little bit in regards to how we view age and opportunity. We see more and more that people who are older, being able to do more with life, and people are living longer than ever before. Health has improved significantly in a lot of places. So the ability to have a more fulfilling life and do more fulfilling things later on in life has certainly increased compared to what it used to be. Yeah, even 30 years ago, or even 100, especially 100 years ago.
mhm,
So to see those kinds of changes, I like that. And again, as a person who is getting older and still feels like there is so much that I want to do, it definitely gladdens my heart to think that um, even though I'm going to be 37 here in like a month, that it's not all over. I didn't pass my 30s. I didn't sail into my 30s and now this is it. This is all my life will ever be. This is all I can ever become. There's still an opportunity to do so much more. So
right,
um I think that's one of the things I appreciate the most about this episode, is that it shows him, he was kind of resigned to his fate of turning 30 and it kind of being all over, to him discovering for himself that it's not, and that he was still more than willing to fight as he advanced in age
right,
in the episode.
mhm,
So I want to talk about everybody else and
okay,
how strange they were acting.
right,
And we see an overly aggressive Dax, an incredibly pessimistic Odo, a kind of fearful worrywart of Bashir, and
O'Brien,
how
you
would
mean?
you? Yeah, O'Brien, and then Kira is just kind of confrontational,
Right,
argumentative.
yeah,
Um, and O'Brien, not O'Brien, but Bashir notices right away that something is not right about
right,
anybody,
mhm.
and so once they kind of establish that they are acting out as elements of his psyche. Do you agree with those elements that they showed of him?
That well, how do you mean exactly? Because I mean, if you're
Like
saying
like they were saying that, like, when they recognized that he was in a coma and they were all playing out aspects of his personality, do you agree that that was the representations that we saw were accurate? Like, would you say that
I see what
Bashir
you're saying.
has an aggressive side, has a pessimistic side, or things like that? Have we seen enough of him to agree with that?
I'm gonna say it now. No, and I think this episode is not that great. Not so. Let me back up a little bit and answer that question. So, do I feel like the characters are representing Bashir well? Other than Cisco, like being the perfect doctor, no, because we've never. So okay, Dax. If Dax represents his impulsiveness, like kind of jump in there and go do what needs to be done, that makes sense. In the I'm a doctor and I don't care about the danger. I'm gonna go help people regardless of danger. But he's not violent. And then Kira being the confrontational person, Bashir isn't confrontational like that. I mean, frankly, no, he just isn't. And O'Brien being Mr. Dowdy Pants, that's not right. Odo being overly suspicious. I mean, it was more like the characters were exaggerated versions of themselves in some sense than the
Thank
other
you.
way
That's
around.
what I thought. That's exactly what I thought too. Because I mean, when they started saying how these were the aspects of Bashir's character, I felt like that was wrong. I
Yeah.
would have much more appreciated if they had said that these were kind of like caricatures of themselves,
Right.
because
Yeah,
it
like
kind of was.
Odo
Yeah,
Odo in his own mind can't quite bring out the full expression of people. These are caricatures of them within his mind. And then he consciously recognizes that
right.
they like for example, they should have expressed or they should the idea part of it was is that because they are him, they don't have knowledge about things that he doesn't have knowledge about. Like that
Mhm.
should have been more clear. Because like for example, O'Brien fixes something, but Bashir doesn't have the knowledge to fix things. So it's like,
So Bashir actually does. Bashir has explained on
oh, right,
a
you're
couple
right,
of times that he has taken engineering extension
and he does
courses.
mention that in
So
this actually
yes,
episode. Yes,
and
you're
so
right.
he
You're right.
does have some rudimentary knowledge, which explains why O'Brien was able to fix certain things, but not everything.
Right.
So
Okay. Right. Right.
yes,
Right. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because it gives me a chance to think about it. And yeah, like of course it makes sense that Kira is the aggressive, confrontational one. That's who she is in real life. She's just doing it more. And Odo, of course, is the suspicious one. That's who he is. And O'Brien, we've seen. He's not Mr. Dowdy Pants, but I would certainly say that he is in a position where he has to ask questions to figure out what the solutions are, and therefore you could just fall into the habit of just asking questions to the point of not getting anything done. Well, what about this? What about that? What about that? What about that? In ad infinitum. And then Dax, I mean, you can see that we've seen episodes where she worked with the Klingons, and so she has the ability to be aggressive. Um, but like for example, Quark didn't have necessarily anything represent him. And then like even
yeah,
Garrick, it would have made sense for Garrick to still have been some version of Bashir, and then like it turns out that he's been hijacked or something. I don't know. I
yeah.
would
I
just
think
say that
this would have made for. I think it would have made for a much better episode if Garrick had played more into the the confidant role. That he was the one that, out of everybody else that Bashir should have trusted and looked to for help, that it was Garrick who continued to help him the most.
right,
Garrick does the most here to distract him,
right,
whereas, and we find out later on that's because he's the Lethian,
right,
but still, I feel like it that would have made more sense considering their relationship and what we're seeing of
right,
them at this
right.
time, you know.
Yeah, and so I don't like this episode. I feel I'm going to back up and say why this way. I have vivid dreams, nightmares in particular. And it's always funny. I know why I have nightmares. If I'm ever cold, particularly my feet, if I'm ever cold, like my sheets are off of my body, I have nightmares. I always wake up from nightmares and I'm cold. Like it's just this weird thing about me. And so I can remember not the dreams themselves because of course it's kind of frustrating phenomenon where like the details of dreams they recede and get lost, and I can't remember all the
Mhm.
details. But I know how vivid they feel in the moment, and how they're always nonsense whenever, of course, you think about them. So on one level, I want to give this episode the benefit of the doubt. Like, okay, this is a dreamscape. Like, for example, my initial complaint was like, well, why would Bashir's brain be mapped out to the station? And then it's like, well, no, that's
You
not
know,
it. It's not that
that's
it's now to the station. It's that he is thinking, he's dreaming, and therefore in the dream, that's the logic the dream gives to the station in his brain. It's not literal. It's just his his storytelling inside the dream itself.
mhm.
And so if you give it that bit of the doubt, then you just let it play out. But I think that that emphasizes why I think the episode just kind of falls flat for me. Is like basically everything that happens in this episode is meaningless. We learn some
That's
things
the other
about
thing too.
Bashir and his.
It's worse than a bottle episode. I mean, we do learn some things about
Yeah,
Bashir, but it does absolutely nothing to advance the overall
that's it.
plot of our show.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which is always gonna be a
right.
problem with things like this because it's like
Yeah,
there's absolutely no reason why we can't do both. Why can't you give me an episode that advances the plot
right.
and tells me more about the character that is the focal point here? And I will say they get better at this,
Yeah,
and there are other episodes that feature other characters that also tie into the greater story arc. But beyond the brief mention of the Dominion at the very beginning of the episode, at the
uh
onset of
huh.
the issue, we never hear anything else,
Hmm.
and there is no consequence for anybody in this episode.
Right.
So it doesn't.
Yeah, Bashir wakes up and he's fine. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um.
It's it does nothing for us here. So you're right.
Right. I would have like it would have been more interesting instead of him having all of the versions of people in his brain, like just have him confront Garrick and Cork and the Lethian, because those were the three characters that were in the bar or in the when they were eating. I initially thought that was going to be the three characters because you meet those three first in the dreamscape. You meet Cork and you meet Garrick, and then there's a monster. And if you're like, well, the Lethian, then of course Lethian. But anyway, um, and then if the rest of the episode had been, let's say that they didn't have another doctor on hand, and so they're having to themselves figure out how to help Bashir without having his technical expertise, and that would give them a chance to like have to work through an issue that they don't have immediate help for. They could learn stuff about Bashir at the same time that he's thinking about those things himself. Like he overhears them talking about his tennis career, and that gets him to thinking about why did he not go into tennis, that kind of thing. But they decided to emphasize the this is a nightmare dreamscape forced coma aspect, and I feel like it lends itself to being weird, and it doesn't work. Like if you're gonna commit to being weird, it's a nightmare. Like boom, let's go for it. Like when he entered Quarks and there was all the crashing and banging and man, I was like, man, whatever's in there is truly violent. Like there was
Hmm.
truly something like they got some great crashing noises because I was listening and I was like, whatever's in there, I'd be running hell away from it. I wouldn't be like Bashir, like, oh, hello, hello. I'd be like, whatever this is, I don't want to touch that. I'm out. And Quark is all cowering, and Bashir's like, anyway. My point is that if they had really they didn't commit to the weird enough to make it like a full dreamscape. And when they didn't do it quite right, as we've talked about. And yeah, you could skip this episode in the future and you wouldn't miss a thing, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and that scene where they're in the bar and things are being tossed and thrown at them and everything else, it really helps that it's just so dark and you can't see anything, and that chair just comes flying out of that darkness, that nothingness,
Hmm.
you know. But yeah, they do a great job of kind of giving you this otherworldly big bad that's somewhere in the shadows, and we're just not sure what's going on,
Right.
you know. I did, we did talk a little bit about like, trying to figure out who represented what, and we were talking about Quark not really being sure what he represented, but there was a brief discussion about that, and it's that Quark is basically like the supposed to be the part of Bashir that is all knowing. And if you watch the episode and you think about where Quark is and the things that he says, you recognize that he was the one who had Bashir follow what he was saying, he would have been in the best position all along to defeat the Lethian. When we first encounter Quark, it's immediately after Bashir leaves the infirmary and Quark is hiding, and he says to him, "If you move, he'll find us, he'll hurt us." So he's
Right.
telling him basically to stay put. which we
Right.
later find out through the roundabout of the episode he should have stayed in the infirmary all along.
Right.
Then later on, when they meet for the second time, Quark is taking bets as to whether or not Bashir will die. And it's
Right.
kind of, then they start talking about which parts of him will go first. And as he's saying what parts will go first, these are also the people that disappeared and their representation of Bashir and him dying and him and his body shutting down. So he's kind of that all-knowing bit, which they don't really lean too hard into it. You really have to kind of like pay attention to the episode and
Right.
to and honestly to read about it because I did not know that until later on when I was looking up aspects of this episode and
Right.
found out certain bits of that. And then going back and looking at it and realizing he does. He absolutely does. He's kind of that all-knowing part that had he been paid attention to in the first place, well, the episode would have been over because he never would have left the sick bay.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, I think overall this episode, you're right. It doesn't do enough for us here, and yeah, it's totally skippable. It could be a
Yeah.
skippable episode. I
Yeah.
like I like Bashir. We've talked about his valiant qualities, how much he's down for his friends and supports them and helps them and things like that. And I would like to see more episodes where he does that. But
Hmm.
in this regard, beyond learning a bit about the man behind the doctor's uniform, it just doesn't do anything for us. Everything that we see or that we learn about Bashir in this episode could have been served in other ways.
Right. I do want to quickly mention though that I did think that Alexander Siddig as Bashir in this episode, especially when he was playing the older version of himself, I felt he actually did a good job. Like he committed. Like he was fully committed to the shaking. I'm having a hard time talking. Kind of. I mean, he was acting. You could tell he was acting, but I was really giving the guy credit. I was like, he's really leaned over. He looks thinner. Like just the way something about the way he's acting. He looks thinner. He looks aged. They did a great job with the makeup. Um, uh, Nothing about his performance in this episode was wrong. He played it to the nines, um, and I think he did a great job. I just don't think that. I mean, we've seen Bashir, the character, risk his, like the episode with Garrick, where Garrick had that mind pain receiver blockage thing go bad, and he had to help Garrick get through it. Like that was an episode where Bashir, the doctor, really shone through. This one was more about Bashir, the man, but this episode about Bashir, the doctor, didn't deny the man. It gave other characters a chance to shine, like Garrick in that episode, and so yeah, Siddick's performance was great, but I feel like this episode was kind of a miss overall.
Well, that's fine. I'm gonna give it to you. I agree. I think that it has its entertaining moments, but overall, since it doesn't really do anything for us, plot wise, for the overall Deep Space Nine plot, that um, it could be missed. We did talk about how even the 1 minute, the almost precisely 1 minute scene with Cisco was the more entertaining and engaging scene that we got out of all of this. And again, it was over before it could ever really begin.
Right.
So we get nothing here for anybody. Um, and I mean that happens sometimes, I guess.
Hmm.
Back when they were doing 26, 24 episode seasons, that happened. Doesn't happen, I guess now every all the shows with their 10 to 12 uh episode seasons, everything has to be impactful, everything has to be meaningful, so we don't have to worry about
Yeah.
that, I
No
guess, in some of the
extraneous
other stuff.
fat to cut out. Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss the filler episode, I will say.
Yeah.
I'm gonna miss
See,
those.
yeah, I agree. I feel like there is something kind of lost. While on some level I like the streamlined aspect of storytelling, the just gregarious nature of 26 episodes a season, that's lost in our modern culture. Modern TV shows.
I mean, I miss it. Like I said, I'm gonna miss it. I would like it if we could go back to that because you find because there for every crappy one there are some rare gems in there, and
Yeah,
we won't have those, and also the show's runs won't seem really as impactful. Like, Discovery is coming up on its fifth season, I believe, but again, each season has only been 10 to 12 episodes.
right.
So in order for it to have the same number of episodes as a show like Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or like that, it's gonna have to run for 10 to 12 years
Yeah,
to get the same. Yeah,
if this season has 26 episodes, but most shows have 10, that means you'd have to run 2.5 seasons worth of episodes of the current show to get anywhere like the content. And I
yeah,
think the reason reason we're nostalgic about that is because even though this episode, for example, wasn't the greatest, it still gave us a chance to really get to know Bashir. And if we
right.
didn't have this episode, while on some levels we can skip it, we would still miss out on getting to know Bashir. On other shows, you just get the characters when they're amongst all the other characters and they're working as a team, and there's not the moments to kind of relax with one character and learn about them. Um, so
And
there's this trade off there. Yeah.
you definitely just hit on the head like one of the main complaints about Discovery and the fact that like we in the complaint has been that when they finally give us a compelling character to know and understand, that the character typically is written off the show. Either they die
Oh
or
no.
they go and do something else. Their career path takes them elsewhere or whatever. And so people are always complaining about it. And I'm like, but you're the reason that we don't have that knowledge and more time with the character is because you often complained about filler episodes. You complained that these episodes do nothing, they go nowhere, and you didn't want to see any of those. Now you realize just how important they are because that character that you fell in love with so much, you could have done that through a series of those kind of bottle episodes that we don't have anymore.
Right.
And so that is definitely the trade-off, and it sucks. And Discovery has been really, really hard with it because they've come up with some really compelling characters. And just when you're like, man, that character is so great, they're gone. You
Mm,
know, it's like
darn.
it's just yeah. Q might as well have just stepped in just like I did and snapped his fingers. I'm like, oh, you like that one? Mine. And that's it.
Right.
So but but yeah, I mean, I miss that format, the 24, 26 episode format. I don't think that it'll ever come back because, they're filming, 17, 18 hours a day to do these episodes and stuff. And I'm sure that's very hard on them. And
Yeah.
I mean, we want to you say what you want. I mean, they're actors and I'm sure they're paid extremely well for what they do, but could anybody imagine doing the same thing over and over again, 18 hours a day? You're in tight form-fitting clothes, or you're in tight form-fitting clothes plus you've got the various prosthetics you've got to wear and all the rest of it. It's probably very uncomfortable for a
Yeah.
long period of time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then you got to do it every day. So it's not like a one off, oh, that was just one 18-hour day. Nope. Seven. You got seven of those.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yep, I can definitely agree that the change makes sense for the industry, but it sometimes trades off with all that wonderful content, even if it is
Yeah.
sometimes sippable filler content at times. So,
Well, as we wrap things up here for this episode, I did want to touch back again on just commemorating Deep Space Nine and the 30-year anniversary. There has been a lot of things online about the 30-year anniversary. You can go to StarTrek.com and you can review a lot of this stuff. I know that Sirach Lofton, who played Jake, of course, he has posted a couple of different things both through StarTrek.com and through his podcast, which is called The Seventh Rule, which you can watch on YouTube, about the legacy of the show. A lot of the other actors have also sat down and given their own talks. You can watch Nana Visitor, who played Kira Nerys, Terry Farrell, who was Jadzia Dax, and Armin Shimmerman, who played Quark. All talk about their experience on the show and how the show has kind of taken on a second life here in these last few years, and being hailed basically as very much ahead of its time from the 90s to now. So if you're
right.
interested in any of those things, I would highly recommend you go to either StarTrek.com or to YouTube and watch them. Some of the videos can be kind of long, especially when they do like their panel discussions, but they're worth it. The ones with those three in particular, Kira, Jadzia, and Quark, and they talk about the show and its impact and what they're seeing now, and some of them even coming back to do some Trek stuff. Like Kira and Quark were both on the animated show Lower Decks, and
Mhm.
they voiced their characters again for the show. They talk about that, and it's a lot of fun, and it's very interesting to see how they too are experiencing kind of a resurgence in their Trek careers through this stuff. So very much worth it. Go watch
Nice.
it, enjoy it. Um, the one thing I will say, and I hope that they rectify soon, is we get something with Avery Brooks. The man has been incredibly elusive. Um, no new interviews, no nothing. Not even when they did the documentary "What We Left Behind" several years ago. Uh, Nothing.
Right.
And I know that he's alive. I know that he's well. I know he's doing things. I know also that he has stated over and over again he's a very private man. But at some point, I mean, we need him. He was the captain. We need to have him come back.
Yeah.
So I would really love it if somebody could figure out what it would take to get him back. And I believe that Sirach Lofton is probably our only real angle there. I know that they stay in
Mhm.
contact, and
Yeah.
Sirach has talked a lot about Avery Brooks and his desire to kind of come back and do other projects and stuff like that, but nothing is really solidified on those grounds yet. So, guys, I don't know what you're waiting for, you greater Star Trek people who are in control of things, but make it happen. We need Captain Cisco back. So, give us something.
Yeah.
Man,
Exactly.
it's been 30 years. I need the man to come back. Okay? So,
Yeah.
but any other final thoughts that you have, David, for this show that we are continuing to watch and that you have never seen before and you're only in the third season of?
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy to think that we're almost done with season three. We're not quite at the halfway point, but it's coming up soon, and that'll be a milestone in and of itself. Um, so yeah. Yeah.
Well, all right, guys, I think that's going to do it for us here on this very special episode of The Fire Caves. Remember, you can catch us anywhere you listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. And again, that's The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook by the same name, and on our YouTube channel where you can watch us actually do these podcasts. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can feel free to leave them for us. Just remember, be polite or else we won't answer, and we'll just find you instead. Um, Other than that, guys, until we see you next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.